Welcome to the Infidelity Hub. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. On a cold New York night, light layers of snow were frozen on top of the trains. The yellow light of the streetlights on the roadside was adding to the glare of this city. In the same light, a man stood by the high window of an apartment. There was no expression in his eyes, but a storm was raging within him. That man was Ethan Carter, who had been abandoned by his wife just a few hours earlier. The room was dark, just the blue light of the laptop screen illuminating his face slightly. His eyes were glued to the screen. He had never dreamed that his life would come to this point. A few hours earlier, his wife Sophia had picked up his bag and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" asked Ethan softly. Sophia, without looking at him, said, "Where my life can be better. I can't waste my life with a failed man." Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm not a failure, Sophia. I'm working hard. Things will change. Just give it some time." Sophia looked into his eyes for the first time, but there was no love in her eyes that she ever had. He laughed and said, "Time? There is no difference between you and your investment in useless crypto. Both are of no use." Ethan felt as if someone had stabbed him in the chest. "So it was all just for the money?" Sophia replied without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan. I can't afford to waste my time with your torn luck and empty bank balance. Daniel has it all: money, fame, power. You are nothing." Ethan clenched his fists. Daniel, his best friend. "You and Daniel?" Sophia smiled and picked up her bag and opened the door, saying, "Yes, and now I'm going with him." The door closed, and with that, Ethan's old life came to an end. There was an awkward silence in the room. Sophia's words rang in his ears. "You are nothing. Your crypto investment is worthless." He raised his head and looked directly at the laptop screen. He slowly logged into his old crypto account, which he had created years ago. As the screen loaded, his eyes widened. His 100 Bitcoin investment had now turned into $900 million. For a second, he thought it was a mistake. He refreshed the screen several times. No, it's true. His mind began to race fast. He remembered Sophia's words, "Your crypto investment is worthless." Now that investment had made him the richest man in the world. There was a distinct sparkle in his eyes. He was no longer just living to be rich. He was living for revenge. He called his friend Robert Carter, who had advised him to invest in crypto years ago. "Robert, I need your help." Robert picked up the phone and said, "Oh, so you miss me now? I thought you must be sitting somewhere in a corner crying." Ethan said with a slight smile, "No, Robert, the time for crying is gone. Now it's time to start the game." Robert Carter's voice was steady on the phone, but he could sense that Ethan was in a different energy right now. He wasn't the same weak man his wife had abandoned. "What do you mean to start the game?" asked Robert lightly. Ethan looked at the laptop screen where the glowing sum of $900 million was visible. "Do you remember when I just put in $100 in Bitcoin at your behest?" said Ethan. Robert was silent for a moment and then smiled. "Yes, and you always said it was of no use to you. Now tell me, how much is the balance?" Ethan's voice was cold, but he had a distinct firmness. $900 million. Robert's breath stopped. "What?" "Yes, you heard that right," said Ethan. "And now I want you to help me. This money will not only be used to build my future, but also to erase the past of some people." Robert took a deep breath. "Who are you talking about?" "Sophia and Danielle." Robert hesitantly said, "Look, Ethan, I understand that they betrayed you, but it would not be right to burn yourself in the fire of revenge." Ethan laughed, but there was no longer innocence in his laughter. "Robert, I'm not going to burn. I'm going to burn. Now this game will be played on my terms." At the most expensive club in New York, Danielle and Sophia were enjoying a lavish party. Lights, alcohol, and money were flowing all around. Sophia raised her glass and looked at Daniel and said, "Now I am convinced that I made the right decision. Ethan was just a failed man, and you—" He put his hand lightly on Daniel's cheek. You're the man I've always been with." Daniel smiled proudly and said, "You don't even miss him now, do you?" Sophia laughed and replied, "The last time I saw him, he was looking at me without saying a word. He was completely broken. I think now he must be drinking and crying on a street corner." "That was his worth," Daniel said as he slammed his glass. But just then, a breaking news flashed on the club's big screen. America's newest billionaire, Ethan Carter. The smile disappeared from Daniel and Sophia's faces. Sophia's glass slipped out of her hand and fell down. Daniel looked at the screen nervously. There was a picture of Ethan, where he was sitting in an exclusive interview. Next to him sat the world's biggest investor. It can't be," Sophia said softly. Daniel sweated on his forehead. How did this happen? Just then, a call came over Sophia's phone. Ethan Carter. His hands were trembling. He picked up the phone with trembling hands and said softly, "Yes." "Hello?" Ethan's voice came from the other side, cold, strong, and dangerous. "Who is the cause of embarrassment now, Sophia?" The phone was disconnected. Sophia's face flushed. The party was still going on at the club, but time had stopped for Sophia and Danielle. The words "Ethan Carter, New York's new billionaire," flashing across the screen pierced his eyes like burning embers. Sophia's hands were still shaking. She couldn't understand how this had happened. No, it's no joke," she muttered to herself. Daniel's face was white. He pulled out the phone and quickly searched Ethan Carter on Google. "It's not funny, Sophia. This is the reality." The screen featured recent photos of Ethan in front of a luxurious private jet with the world's biggest billionaires, giving a speech at a global tech summit. Sweat trickled down Daniel's forehead. This man is now one of the richest people in America. Fear appeared in Sophia's eyes. "Is it really?" Then his phone rang again. Ethan Carter calling. This time he hesitantly picked up the call. A cold, confident voice came from the other side. "How are you, Sophia?" Sophia's voice trembled. "Ethan, all of it. How's that?" Ethan said with a light laugh. "You said I was a failure, didn't you? And you told me I'd be a waiter at a restaurant. But look, Sophia, whose luck shines and who's going to be ruined now?" Sophia tried to make a sound out of her throat, but no words came out. "Tell Daniel to get ready quickly," Ethan continued, "because now I'm going to buy his whole empire." The phone got disconnected. Sophia looked at Danielle, but she now had the same nervousness on her face as she did. "We have to do something right away," said Daniel sharply. But he didn't know that there was nothing that could happen now. The game was over and the bet was in Ethan's hands. The next day, the New York Stock Exchange. Another breaking news. Ethan Carter officially takes over Brooks Industries. As soon as this news came, shares of Daniel's entire company started falling. Sophia panicked and saw the news on her phone and ran towards Daniel. "You have to do something," he shouted. Daniel was calling his financial experts, but there was only one answer from all sides. Nothing can happen. "Ethan bought our entire company," said one board member. "Now the company is under his control." Daniel's face fell. No, it can't be. But it had happened. That same night, Ethan attended a plush gala. New York's biggest business tycoons and politicians were present there. Just then, the media reporter came up to him and asked, "Mr. Carter, how do you feel that you bought the company of your old wife's new boyfriend?" Ethan replied with a slight smile, "An empire built by infidelity and greed always falls. I just helped it drop." Just then there was a familiar face standing by the gate, Sophia. She had tears in her eyes. She came to Ethan begging, "Ethan, I know I made a big mistake. Please, can we talk?" Ethan looked into her eyes. Where there was pain before, now there was only cold comfort. "There's nothing left, Sophia. The game is over." Sophia had tears in her eyes, but Ethan just had cold comfort in her eyes. She had never felt so much confidence and strength in her entire life. The woman who had once left him as a failed man was now pleading before him. "Ethan, I know I made a mistake," Sophia's voice trembled. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong." Ethan looked into her eyes without emotion. Didn't you think of it when you left me? Sophia tried to grab his arm, but Ethan pulled his hands back. I thought Daniel... He began to speak, but Ethan cut him off. Daniel, what? Will he always make you happy? That he will never betray you? Sophia's face flushed. Ethan said with a light laugh, What happened? Daniel also left you. Sophia's lips trembled. She wanted to say something, but the words weren't coming out. Do you know, Sophia, said Ethan in a cold voice, the day you left me, I decided that one day I would make you regret it, and behold, that day has come. Sophia had tears in her eyes. Can't you forgive me? Ethan looked at him and said, I can forgive, but there is no second chance for what you did. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and made a call. Hello, security. A woman has entered the party without invitation. Please throw him out. Sophia's eyes widened. No, Ethan, please. But Ethan didn't listen to him. Within seconds, 2 security guards came and started taking him out. Ethan, please, I made a mistake, but I still love you, Ethan said with a light laugh. I wish you had felt this love when I wanted you the most. But now, your time is over now. Sophia was dragged out, and the sound of her screams faded away slowly. There was silence in the whole party. Everyone was watching this scene, but no one was saying anything. Ethan raised his glass and said with a slight smile, So guys, enjoy this wonderful evening. And of course, always remember one lesson. Never underestimate anyone because tomorrow he may be far ahead of you. The whole hall erupted in applause. Ethan took a sip from the glass and said to himself, Now the game is over. But he didn't know that Daniel was still going to make the last move. New York nights are never quiet, but that night on the roof of the most expensive hotel in the city, where Ethan's success was being celebrated, the atmosphere had changed completely. Sophia was kicked out of the party, and Ethan had a look of satisfaction on his face, but he didn't know that the game wasn't over yet. Daniel, who had been missing so far, was ready to make his last move. Ethan had returned to his penthouse after the party. He was completely satisfied now. He now owned a stake in the world's largest companies, owned billions of dollars, and most importantly, showed the people who had deceived him their rightful place. He stood on his balcony looking down at the lights of New York. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and there was peace in his eyes. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Ethan picked up the phone. Who's there? A cold and confident voice came from the other side. Ethan, did you really think you won? Ethan immediately understood that it was Danielle Brooks. You're still left? Said Ethan with a slight laugh. Danielle took a deep breath and said, You took my company, took my money, and now ruined Sophia too. But I know what your weakness is, Ethan. Ethan replied in a cold voice. My weakness? I'm afraid you've lost your senses, Daniel. Always remember, the person who has nothing to lose is the most dangerous, Daniel said in a lighter voice. And now I have nothing left to lose, but you have a lot. The phone got disconnected. Ethan was silent for a few moments. He put his glass on the table and quickly called his security team. Keep an eye on Danielle Brooks right away. I want to know his every move. Danielle, on the other hand, was sitting in his penthouse. Files, news articles, and documents from Ethan's companies were strewn all around him. There was a mixture of tension and anger on his face. He called his business partners and said, We're going to hurt Ethan where he's hurting the most. What do you mean? Asked one of the partners. Daniels picked up a paper and waved it in the air, saying, Ethan is no longer just one billionaire, but the owner of many companies. If we get his business empire into legal troubles, he will ruin himself. But for that you will need very powerful people, said another. Daniel smiled. And do you think I don't know such people? The next day, the New York Stock Exchange. A shocking news spread throughout the market. Federal investigation on Ethan Carter's business holdings. This news was on every news channel. Ethan's companies were being accused of money laundering and tax fraud. Media cameras were frozen outside his company. The reporter was shouting, Is Ethan Carter's empire going to fall too? Is this guy really what people think, or is he a fraudster? Ethan was sitting in his office watching all this. Daniel's threat was coming true. He had embroiled Ethan's companies in a legal battle. Daniel's voice echoed on his phone again. "So, how did you feel when you found out you were still in the game, Ethan?" Ethan smiled and said, "Daniel, you still don't understand. Do you think it was your trick? But now the real game begins." Daniel said in a cold voice, "Then let's see whose victory this game ends." Ethan was looking out of his office window. The bustle of New York's business district was going on, but there was only one question in his mind. Could Daniel really ruin it like this? She saw the news headlines on her phone. Federal investigation begins on Ethan Carter's business. The media was making it look like it was really a scam. Investors were beginning to panic. Many of his business deals were now in jeopardy. Danielle's trick was working. Robert hurried into the office, holding some files in his hand. "Ethan, this matter could be serious. If this case drags on for a long time, many of your companies may be closed." Ethan took a deep breath, but there was no nervousness in his eyes, but firmness. "So we have to finish this case quickly," she said. Robert shook his head and said, "Daniel has hired some powerful lobbyists and lawyers. He is also trying to win over some officials of the government." Ethan said with a slight smile, "If he can buy government officials, I can show him the truth." At the same time, on the other hand, Daniel was having a secret meeting with his lawyers. "We have to make this case so strong that Ethan himself kneels in court." One of his lawyers said, "We have spoken to some government officials. If we implicate Ethan in a tax fraud case, many of his companies could be locked." Daniel laughed and said, "Absolutely, and once investors lose confidence in him, he will be doomed to himself." But he didn't know that Ethan had already sensed his next move. The next day, the New York Supreme Court. Ethan and his legal team were ready. It was the first hearing of the case. The judge looked at the documents carefully and said, "Mr. Carter, you have been charged with tax fraud and money laundering. What explanation do you have?" Ethan looked at his lawyer and then said, "Your Honor, I have evidence that this whole case is part of a conspiracy." He handed over a file to the judge. As soon as the judge opened the file, his eyebrows were raised. "What is it?" asked the judge. Ethan said in a calm voice, "This is evidence that Danielle Brooks bribed government officials to implicate my companies." The entire courtroom was stunned. Daniel, who had been full of confidence by now, suddenly began to panic. "That's a lie," he shouted. But then Ethan took out a pen drive and played it on the projector in the court. It was a recording of a secret meeting between Daniels and his lobbyist, where they were talking about bribing government officials. The color faded from Daniel's face. The judge took a deep breath and said, "This case is going in a completely different direction. We will conduct a thorough investigation into the matter, but for now, Mr. Brooks, you're taken into federal custody." Daniel said in a startled way, "No, it's a lie!" But the guards handcuffed him and took him out. Ethan looked at her and said with a slight smile, "You said you had nothing to lose, but now you'll have plenty of time to think about it in prison." That same night, Sophia was sitting in her hotel room. She turned on the TV, where Daniel Brooks arrested, accused of bribing government officials. The news was going on. Tears flowed from her eyes. "What do I do now?" he said to himself. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He picked up the phone with trembling hands. Ethan's voice came from the other side, quiet but menacing. "Now you're left alone, Sophia. What are you going to do now?" Sophia's voice trembled. "Ethan, please, I just want to talk to you." "There's nothing left to talk about," Ethan said coldly. "But yes, I can give you one last chance. Come to my office tomorrow morning." Sophia quickly said, "Yes, I'll come." The phone got disconnected, but she didn't know that Ethan had called her, but just to show her her true place. The New York morning was mildly cold, but the fire of panic and restlessness was burning inside Sophia. She quickly dressed up in an expensive black dress, thinking that she would have to pose confidently in front of Ethan. She put light makeup on her face, thinking that maybe Ethan would melt at the sight of her. But deep inside, he knew he was no longer the same weak man he had abandoned years ago. She closed the door of her luxury car and drove off to Carter's Tower. Carter Tower, Ethan's office. Sophia arrived at the reception and said, "I have to meet Ethan." The receptionist looked at her, a slight smile on her face, as if she knew what was going to happen. "Mr. Carter is waiting for you. Go to their office." Sophia heaved a sigh of relief. Perhaps he still had a chance. Ethan's office, one of the tallest buildings in New York, overlooking the entire city. Sophia entered with slow steps. Ethan was sitting in his chair, his back to the door. "Sit down, Sophia," he said without looking back. Sophia kept her voice normal and said, "Thank you, Ethan. I thought you wouldn't want to meet me." Ethan slowly turned his chair and looked at her intently. "I thought you'd never come back, but here you are." Sophia looked into his eyes. He was no ordinary man anymore. He was full of confidence and strength, a man who had put the world under his feet. "Ethan, I know I made a mistake," she said softly. "I never understood you well, but with Danielle, I didn't know he would do that." Ethan laughed and said, "Oh, you didn't know? Did you know when you called me a loser?" Sophia bowed her head. "I said that angrily." "Angry?" said Ethan with a slight smile. "So you angrily sided with Daniel, angrily left me, angrily mocked me?" Sophia quickly replied, "No, I'm just wanted the money, right?" said Ethan in a cold voice. Sophia remained silent. "What do you want now, Sophia?" Sophia looked him in the eye and said, "I want to have you back, Ethan. I regret what I have done, but we can still be together." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. Then he turned on the intercom. "Lisa, is that file ready?" The receptionist's voice said, "Yes, sir. I'm sending it right away." In a few seconds, an assistant entered the room and handed Ethan a thick file. Ethan handed the file to Sophia. "What is it?" asked Sophia nervously. "Open it," Ethan said coldly. Sophia opened the file, and as she turned the pages, the color of her face faded. What is it?" "This is your latest credit report. Your accounts have been blocked. You have a $5 million debt that Daniel took on in your name. And here's your execution notice. Your apartment and all the property is now being confiscated by the bank." Sophia had tears in her eyes. "No, no, no, it can't be." Ethan smiled and said, "This is the reality you chose yourself, Sophia." Sophia tried to hold Ethan's hand. "Please, Ethan, I can't go anywhere else. I can only come to you." Ethan gently withdrew his hands. "And I can't bring you back to me." Sophia looked into his eyes. "So, are you going to leave me like this?" Ethan looked at her for a moment and said, "I loved you, Sophia. But now I have only one thing left for you, mercy." He then signaled to the security guards, "Take Miss Carter outside." Sophia had tears in her eyes. "No, Ethan, please." But the guards began to take him out. Standing at the door, she looked at Ethan for the last time. "You've made me regret it, Ethan," she cried. "Where am I going now?" Ethan took a deep breath, but he didn't answer. The door closed, and Sophia's story was over forever. After Sophia's departure, there was silence in the office for a moment. Ethan stood by the window looking at the lights of New York City. There was no remorse in his eyes, nor any relief. The game had come to the point where he wanted it to go. Robert came in and placed a file on the table saying, "You completely ruined him. Now she can't go anywhere." Ethan sighed deeply, saying, "I had no hatred for that, Robert. All I wanted was for her to know what the end of a person is when he rejects true love and runs after greed." Robert nodded. "You didn't give him a second chance. Was that right?" Ethan said without moving. "Second chances are given to those who deserve it. She had made her own choices, and I was just showing her the result of her actions." At the same time, on the other hand, Sophia was sitting on a bench on the side of the road. She had tears in her eyes, but no one was going to see her. He no longer had a home, no bank account, no friends. He pulled out his phone and made one last call to Daniel. "This number doesn't exist anymore." His heart sank. Daniel had completely deceived him. He now realized what a big mistake he had made. He thought, if I had chosen love over greed, I wouldn't be in this state today. But now he had no choice but to regret it. Ethan wasn't celebrating his victory. He was now planning the next move. Robert asked, "What's next?" Ethan said in a calm tone, "Now I'll just move on. I'm going to turn my business into the biggest brand in the world. No one can stop me now." Robert said with a slight smile, "You've really changed, Ethan." Ethan nodded slightly and said, "When the world tries to knock you down, you should make yourself strong enough that you can stand back." That's what I did. The next day, the New York Stock Exchange. Shares of the Carter Group of companies were at an all-time high in history. The world's largest investors were now approaching Ethan for partnerships. The media called him New York's self-made billionaire. Reporters were questioning him. "Mr. Carter, how did you build such a large empire?" "I had nothing to lose, so I won everything," Ethan said with a slight smile. That same night, Ethan was sitting on the balcony of his penthouse. He took out his diary and wrote, "I achieved everything I thought I would, but this journey was not just for me. It was for people who never believed in me. Now, I'm just going to focus on my future." He closed the diary, took a deep breath, and said to himself, "No one can stop me now." The lights of the city flickered from the balcony of New York's tallest penthouse. Ethan Carter, now a billionaire, was looking at his empire. He had achieved everything he had imagined, but somewhere inside, he knew that his battle was still not over. Robert came up to her and placed a glass of whiskey in front of her and said, "So, what now? You eliminated Danielle, showing Sophia her true place. What's next?" "It's time to move on, but I want Sophia and Daniel to realize every day what they've lost," Ethan said lightly. Robert shook his head and said, "You completely ruined them, Ethan. Now they may never be able to stand back." Sophia, on the other hand, was now completely shattered. He had rented a cheap hotel room with his last money. She no longer had any jewelry, no branded clothing, and most importantly, she had no props anymore. She was looking at her face in the mirror. "Is it me?" he said to himself. She began to think that when she had left Ethan, she thought she had won. But now she could see who actually won and who lost. Daniel's condition was even worse. All his business partners had distanced themselves from him. Now he was a fugitive who was embroiled in government cases. One day he called Sophia for his last rescue. "Sophia, I need your help." Danielle's voice was nervous. Sophia replied with a cold laugh, "You ran away from me when you had money. Now you have nothing left and you are coming back to me?" Daniel fell silent. He realized that he had no choice left. Ethan wrote on the last page of his diary, "Sometimes, the greatest revenge is to raise your life so high that your enemies just watch from below." He closed the diary, took a deep breath, and headed for his office. Now he was ready to focus on his next goal, to become the world's biggest business tycoon. Ethan completely destroyed his unfaithful wife, Sophia, and his betraying friend, Daniel. Not only did he rebuild his life, but he also taught a lesson to those who underestimated him and left him behind. Now, the question is, should Ethan have forgiven Sophia and given her a second chance, or did he do the right thing by making them face the consequences of their actions? If you were in Ethan's place, would you have taken revenge or simply moved on? Share your thoughts in the comments. For more powerful and engaging stories, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss an update.